Today we're going to create a tree silhouette. Silhouettes are dark objects against a bright light. In nature, we're most likely to find them during sunset and sunrise. Begin by placing your paper hamburger style. This will make it nice and tall and give us lots of room for all of our branches. We're going to start with the trunk. Now, if you look outside your window, you'll notice that trees are thicker at the bottom where they go down into the ground. So that's the trunk. And then as they go back up towards the sky, the trunk is going to get skinnier. And to make our tree trunk, we're going to start with 3 fingers at the bottom. And at the bottom of the paper, on either side of our fingers, we're going to make a light little dot. And that'll tell us how wide our tree trunk should be. So I'm going to start on one of those dots, and I'm going to kind of want to bring it in a little bit as it goes up. And I'm going to stop just before I get to halfway. So I'll go over to my other dot, and I'm going to go in a little bit, and then come up and stop about where I did on the other side. So now I've got my tree trunk. Now we're going to add a branch onto each side of our trunk. We'll start at the trunk and we'll go off and out in a diagonal manner. So I'll go up and out, and I'll go all the way to the edge of the paper. Then I'll go over to this side and I'll go up and out and all the way off the edge of the paper. And that's really important to remember. Every line that we create today is going to go off the edge of your paper. So now I want it to look like this is separating into one branch and this is separating into another. So I'll start in the middle here, and branches are the same as tree trunks. They start off thickest in the middle where they're attached to the trunk, and then they get really thin as they go out towards the edges. So I'm going to make it go inward a little bit as it gets to the very edge. So now I have my letter Y. From here, I'm going to add 2 more branches. Now, if I want, those branches can go straight, or they can kind of go up and off if we want. So maybe this one goes up and out and changes directions. Just remember, we got to get a little bit skinnier as we go off towards the edge of the paper. Maybe this one does the same. But if you want them to just go diagonal, they can. All right, so now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 branches, each going from thick from the center of the trunk to thin as they go out and going off the edge of the paper. Now I'm going to add 2 more. I could add them on top of these ones. I could have them crisscrossing. I could put some down here. But we shouldn't add any branches to our trunk. They all should start from these branches or up. Now it's really important that all of these areas of negative space that we're creating here are bigger than the size of your, I would even say, thumb. If you can't put your thumb in that area of negative space, then it's too small. So this would be an example of an area that's too small. I can't put my thumb in without touching either line, whereas this one I could put my thumb in without touching those lines. So this one I have to erase. Each time I add a branch to one side, I'll add one to the other. This will give my picture balance. Now that I have 6 branches, I'm going to continue to add more until I have around 12. A little more or a little less than 12 is okay too. Before we move on to the next step, we're going to make sure that we are meeting the expectations. So our trunk should be wider at the base, and it should go all the way off the edge of the paper. As it goes up, it should get a little bit thinner, and it should stop a little bit below halfway. Then all of our branches should be thickest in the middle. And then as they get out towards these outside edges, they should get a little bit thinner. The other thing that we're going to check to make sure is that every single line that we drew goes off the edge of the paper. So this shouldn't happen. My branch shouldn't just stop in the middle of the paper. It has to go all the way to the edge. And finally, the last thing that we have to do is make sure that we can put a thumb in between each of these sections and make sure that our thumb isn't overlapping with any lines. Once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get a Sharpie permanent marker. And for those of you that are working from home, a great substitute for a permanent marker might be a regular black marker. And if you don't have that, you could even use a crayon or colored pencils. And the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to outline all of your lines. Now, for those of you who are working with a Sharpie, those are permanent markers. That means that if they get on something other than your paper, they do not come off. So you're going to want to get some sort of scrap paper, newspaper, even a page from a magazine would work, a piece of lined paper, or this is a piece of mail that I opened up, and just slip that underneath any areas that you're working on to make sure that when that Sharpie goes off the edge, it goes off onto a piece of scrap paper as opposed to the surface that you're working on. Now notice that these lines are not protected by my scrap sheet of paper. So I just have to move or turn the paper I'm working on or my scrap sheet of paper so that I'm protecting that surface that's underneath. After you've outlined everything in black, you're going to go back in and fill in everything in black. Be really careful as you go along these edges. If you get a little bit outside of the edge, then you may have to make that branch thicker to include it so that these edges are nice and clean and crisp. Now, take your time with that Sharpie. If you try to color too big of an area at once, the Sharpie get really streaky and run out of ink. So instead, you need to work in small areas at a time. And go in multiple directions. You can even color in little circles. Okay, once you finish coloring the whole picture in black, you're going to look and see if there are any areas where you still have to fill in or any areas where you may have gotten outside your lines. Here I can see I made a tiny mistake. So what I'll do is I'll outline that part of the branch and no one will know it was a mistake. Now it's time to look for anywhere that you still see pencil. Now, if you use crayon, if you get too close to your black, it'll make the crayon smudge. So just be careful. Make sure you don't get too close. And if it's really close to the black, like it is here, if you use crayon, you may just want to make your branch a little bit thicker instead of erasing. Ta-da! Now I have a tree silhouette. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop here and I'm going to wait for my teacher's next set of instructions.